My boss rapped along to Dance with the Devil while we were working alone. F20, M42, looked directly at me while rapping about violent acts against women. I was just reminded of this really scary incident involving a manager at one of the old jobs I had. This happened about 5 years ago when I was 20, I believe he was around 42 or so, give or take a few years plus or minus. To paint you a picture here, the manager in question, who we'll call Tim, was a short Viking-esque guy, red beard, red hair, bright blue eyes, stocky build, not muscular though. Tim was also a heavy smoker and known racist POS. He dropped the N-word at least 4 times a week for shock factor during conversations. He also used to refer to indigenous people as Indians. He stopped once he found out I was Métis and confronted him about it. He was mostly bark with little bite, but still someone I was cautious around nonetheless. He also had a girlfriend who was also 20 at the time. She was like an alternate reality version of me. Like me, she was a bigger girl, size 24/26-ish, piercings, tattoos, the works. I looked like the replicant tall version of her. It was surreal. He never outright told me he had feelings for me, but on several occasions he'd comment on how much I reminded him of his girlfriend and would ask if I was into women in 3 ways. I was bisexual, he didn't know that though. I gave vague answers every time he asked something of the sort, but one day he made an comment about bisexual women being greedy, to which I reacted negatively to. He put the pieces together from there. A couple weeks went by of him asking me questions about my interests, my hobbies, what I do in my off time, my favorite music, etc. Normally I chalk this up to office banter, but with the creepy undertones I had a hard time engaging him about my personal life. At this time I had also started seeing my now partner of 5 years. When my boss asked again what I was doing after work, I informed him I was going to see my boyfriend. This sent him into a question tailspin. He asked how we met, how long we'd been dating, where he lived even. It was really unnerving. Once again I kept the answers vague, but this time I went on and on about how much I loved my partner and how excited I was to have such an amazing partner in my life. I wanted to be crystal clear that I was not interested in my boss. That same evening as we were closing, he told me about his favorite music. He specifically mentioned a band called Immortal Technique and a song of theirs called Dance with the Devil. I shrugged as I wasn't familiar with the song, so he put it on the store speakers while he swept and I closed cash. For those of you who aren't familiar with that song, it's a very graphic and disturbing song that has a rather intense twist at the end. If you like the song, that's your taste, whatever, but personally as a woman I find it difficult listening to graphic depictions of extreme violence against women. Period. Before continuing, I'd suggest you read through some of the lyrics of the song, specifically the last half as it pertains to this story. Tim turns up the music to an almost deafening level while I count out the cash and get our computers closed up. As he's sweeping, he's actively and loudly rapping along word for word, dropping N-bombs of course, all the way through. He hadn't been looking at me until the later half of the song, where the lyrics begin to depict a woman being R-word and killed by a group of men. It's visceral, violent, terrifying. Tim turns to me at this point of the song and stares into my eyes while pointing and dancing to the lyrics while still rapping along. He was making violent gestures while doing so, for example, motioning a head-stomping gesture with his hands, thrusting during the R-word, etc. I quickly closed cash faster than I ever had in my life. I felt like I was in danger at this point. I grabbed my bag and jacket as the song finished. He turned it off and goes, "Isn't that something? It's poetry. The storytelling is just amazing, isn't it?" I remember my whole body was tense. I muttered, "Not my cup of tea," and left. I should have given him my notice right then and there, but I was in a rough employment situation and couldn't up and leave. After that though, he actually stopped scheduling him and I together very often, and about a month later I gave my notice after finding a better job. Full time. He was furious when I left, of course. The company actually ended up closing that location a few months later because Tim lost it, according to our common connection, a friend of mine, a worker of his. This friend of mine also told me he upped and moved to the other side of the country to be with his ex-wife. Yikes. What made me remember this story was that a few months ago I was running errands in the outskirts of my city. I happened to stop by a random Taco Bell and guess who walks in with a very young-looking woman on his arm? Tim. I was with my partner, who also recognized him when they made eye contact. My partner and I were already seated and eating by this point. Tim looked at us like a deer in the headlights and booked it out of there faster than a kite on the wind. Before he left though, I noticed he had shaved his head and got some suspicious-looking tattoos on his arms. When he turned around, there was a distinct white power symbol patch on his jacket, and his girlfriend's jacket too. So not only was this guy a creep, but also a predator and now white supremacist. I don't go to that area anymore unless I'm accompanied by my partner at all times. Tim is very much a part of my past and I have no desire to run into him ever again.